You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, let's do this. Hi guys, and welcome to One Flesh Podcast. This is our very first episode here today, and we're super excited to share with you guys a little bit about what this podcast is going to be about. My name is Rikhard. I'll be your host throughout this podcast. We are planning to make this a monthly podcast. It will be available both on YouTube as well as anywhere audio podcasts are available. And I'm here today with my beautiful wife. Do you want to introduce yourself, babe?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Hartikainen. And as I was introduced, I am Rikhard's wife.
Yeah. And so it's awesome to have the very first episode here. Me and my wife are doing it. And we would just want to share a little bit about the vision and the plan of this podcast, really. The name, of course, was inspired from the book of Genesis, chapter 2:24. One Flesh Podcast, where it talks about a man should leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And that's really what this podcast is going to be about. It's going to be about marriage, Christian marriage in 2024, and everything that has to do with relationship as well. Singleness and what, how to navigate singleness, as well as how to navigate relationships. So maybe you're here listening to this and you're a single. This podcast is going to be for you. Maybe you're here, you're in a relationship right now, but you haven't tied the knot, you haven't put a ring on it, you haven't pulled the trigger yet. This podcast is for you as well, to help you deal with that. If you're married, if you've just had kids, or maybe you've been married for a long time, this is all for you. So this podcast is all about relationship from the Christian point of view: singleness, relationship, courting, marriage, having kids, being a parent, sex, and all those kind of things is what we're gonna talk about here. And it's not we that are gonna teach on it. We have only been married for about 6 years now.
Yeah, close to 6 years.
6 years, and we think that we're not really qualified yet to teach or share lessons about marriage. So this is a place where we're going to ask questions. We're not going to bring answers. So we're going to host a place where sometimes you and me will be discussing and share with you guys what we come up with through books, through other learning experiences. And other times we'll have guests here talking with people who are more experienced than us, people who have way more kids than us, people who have been married way longer than us. As I said, until you've been married for 10 years, I don't feel like you should even share advice about it. So yeah, that's it. Maybe we want to start sharing a little bit about our story so people can get to know us. Do you want to start, babe?
Sure. I mean, I guess where do you start other than the fact that we met each other when we were living in Lagos, Nigeria at a church there. Both of us were serving. You lived there for 9 years. I lived there for almost 2 years. At that time, we knew each other, but we weren't like friends. I mean, we were doing the type of work that didn't really allow us to be friends or develop a friendship, but we knew each other and we watched each other from afar. So when both of us ended up going home to our respective countries, and neither one of us knew that each other had gone home. And so about 3 weeks after I had gone home and I had made the final decision that I'm going to stay in the United States, I'm not going to return, I'm going to start my life, I immediately, when I say within an hour, I mean within 1 hour of making the decision to stay home, I learned that Rikhard had gone home to Sweden and that he was chatting with some of my friends from church through Facebook. And so I thought, I've got to find out what this guy is doing. He lived there for 9 years. I thought for sure he was going to stay there. So I had to know. I had to know what he was doing. So I reached out to him on Facebook and we started talking ever since. So that's kind of how our story started. And I know for me, I knew really early on that I was like, I think this guy is the one. After a couple of doozies, before I went to live in Nigeria, when I started talking to Rikhard, it was just totally different. There was an obvious difference in our friendship. And so, one thing led to another. We had a long distance relationship for a year and a half, something along those lines, before we finally got married.
Yeah. And when we say long distance relationship, we mean long distance relationship. So let's just talk about that for a moment. I've had a lot of people who have reached out to me asking like, oh, how did you do long distance relationship? And I asked them, how long of a distance is your long distance relationship? Because if you're still in the same time zone, that's not long distance relationship. I'm just kidding. It still qualifies as long distance, but I can say one thing, long distance relationship, and I've told everyone that have asked me about this, I do not recommend it because it's really hard. You don't really get to know each other the way you would if you were courting or dating in the same place, which can have both pros and cons, right? So for me and Brittany, we had to spend a lot of money to travel and meet each other. You know, I traveled and surprised you on your birthday to propose to you and everything. And so like it becomes very expensive financially, materialistically. But other than that, also, there's this component of you can only get to know someone through chat, WhatsApp, Telegram, or even FaceTime or anything. You can only know someone that much. And also the emotional toll that it takes on you.
I think though, like to pause you right there, I think the difference in our story is that both you and I were already in our late 20s.
Yeah.
So I was 27, you were 29, I think, when we started talking and developing our friendship. And then within about 6 weeks of just like, how are you? You know, how is life? What's going on? We had both developed some feelings and decided that we wanted to take our relationship to the next level, even though we lived 7,000 miles and an ocean apart. And so I think for us, we were already at the older end of our 20s, and so our experience was very different because I think we were more mature. We had both done so much in our lives leading up to that point that we were both ready for a deeper and meaningful relationship that wasn't just based on like, oh, you look so nice and I love hanging out with you. It wasn't just puppy love or anything like that. We were connecting on a much deeper and emotional level because, well, frankly, because we were so far apart. And so we could only get to know each other through connecting. And so we would have like our hours long phone calls. And I remember one time my family went to the beach, and I remember being on the phone with you literally for like 6 or 7 hours on the phone, like basically giving you a play-by-play of everything that we were doing, because that was like how we spent time together.
I think the longest one we did was like either 9 or 11 hours. And it was, I remember I was going through the night. So one of the things that we had was that it was not only were we far apart, it was also a 9-hour time difference. Which is very hard because basically when you wake up, I'm getting off work and then we have a few hours and then I'm going to sleep while you're at work. When you get off work, I'm already asleep. And so the time was, I basically sacrificed a night's sleep to talk to you. And of course
you were happy to do it.
Yeah, I was super happy to do it. I really enjoyed it. It was like the best night ever. I talked to this incredible lady, this incredible girl that I had a crush on all night long. I was super happy. But
all night for him,
but
and all day
for you. Yeah. Of course, as I said, our case is a little bit different. But generally speaking, would you, if someone came to you and asked, like, "Hey, I'm long distance dating," what would you say? What would be your advice? Would you say, no, don't do it at all? Or would you say like, hey, you can, but it's going to be really, really hard. And here's some ways that you can make it easier. What would be your advice kind of?
I think it really depends on the person and like what their level of maturity is and what their relationship with God is like. Because I think along with long distance dating, just like dating in person, there are temptations that come along with it too that you have to be able to manage. And you need to have the maturity to be able to manage those, right? And then because you are really only able to connect on an emotional level. You're not going to the movies. You're not really like discovering things together. You're not having adventures together necessarily.
You're not having dinner together, eating the same food.
So it's like you have to kind of like, we were giving each other play. Tonight I'm eating steak and potatoes. What are you eating for dinner? You know, sending each other pictures of our food, stuff like that. But my advice to somebody who is in a relationship with someone who is long distance, first and foremost, it depends on how you met. If you met online and you've never actually met in person, I think that's a red flag. I think it's really important that if you're going to be in a long distance relationship, that you actually have known that person in person before. And so we had that going for us, that we actually knew each other for almost 2 solid years prior to even our like real friendship. So I got to see you from afar. I got to understand your personality and how you behaved when we were hardly even friends. And so I had a really good outside perspective of you. So when I got to know you more as a friend, I liked you even more because I was like, oh, I actually can't believe that he likes the same things I like, or we have a similar vision for our life and the things that we want. And so it went from like, I really respect this man as a person to we actually have a lot of compatibility. So I think if you know the person in person before you are long distance, that's the best way to go. If you're meeting online, I'm not saying that there haven't been plenty of people who have met online that are enjoying a really fruitful and beautiful relationship today.
There's always exception.
Yeah, right. But I think that that's harder. And I think that it's easier to lack commitment if you don't actually know the person prior to long distance. I also think that my advice is don't be long distance for too long. And I feel like we were long distance for a long time, mostly because we were just trying to figure out our lives coming back from this really big experience. So we had an additional layer of challenge that we were working through that I think if we both hadn't just come back to our homes from Nigeria and trying to get our lives back on track and figuring out our careers, I think if we didn't have that, we would have dated a lot shorter time and gotten married sooner.
Yeah. Something that I've seen as well is people that do long distance dating, I think because they are more set on their goal, that they are ready to pay a price greater than someone who isn't long distance dating, in the sense that people that long distance date, many of them date for 3-4 years before they finally get married because, oh, I'm in school, or this one is doing this. But they are more focused on the goal because they are ready. They have already understood the price attached to it. And someone that doesn't date long distance may not really have that sense. And so they might get married earlier many times. I don't actually think it's always recommendable, as you said, to spend a long time, 3-4 years, got to do this, because inevitably you're going to meet people that will become not temptation necessarily. It can lead to that, but they become a distraction.
Right.
And so you have a goal, right? You have a goal to put a ring on it. You have a goal your mind, your heart is already set on a person. But when these distractions come in, distractions will always distract you. And that's
really,
I know, right? Hot take right now, right?
Yeah.
This is the podcast take right here. I'm just kidding, but like that's the purpose of these distractions. It doesn't mean that this person is purposefully trying to detract your plans for a marriage with this other person. It's just life happens, and those kind of things can distract you. And so to avoid those kind of things and to not make your heart somehow get kind of divided in certain issues, the longer you wait, the longer you realize that you can stay away from each other as well. And that's actually not a healthy thing to like, oh, wow, we've been apart for 4 years and I don't even feel it. Like, wow, we're really strong. But then you get together and then like, oh, actually, we've been apart so long that I don't even feel the same.
I don't even know how to be together with you,
Yeah.
And that's actually a really good point that you make, that you, like I said, it depends on your maturity. It depends on the reason that you're long distance. Like if you're both decide that we're going to go to school we need to finish college, and you're both actively working hard to do that, and you make time to visit each other, especially let's say you go to colleges in different states, but you have ways to frequently visit each other, even if it's once every 3 or 4 months, right, on a school break, but you visit each other in a godly manner, and you decide in your heart that this is the person you want to be with, and you make time for that, and you kind of understand that your relationship in that sense is going to be more on hold than actively pursuing deep emotional connection. You already know that you're compatible and you love that person, so you're just taking this time to finish something that's important so that you can have a future together. I think if you're in agreement with that, and you have good accountability in terms of spiritual accountability, your parents, whatever it may be, right? Like you have that, I think that's okay, because you have a goal in mind, and you know, like as soon as we get to that goal and we have made time for each other over those 4 years in university, then that can work for people, right? But if you are long distance and you haven't put an end date on like, this is when we're going to get married and whatnot, but you're just dating long distance because like you like this person a lot, or you feel connections.
You happen to not live together, and now you're just dating,
right?
Distance.
Yeah, I've actually, to be honest with you, I've actually met many people that are in long distance relationships that are Christians, that it's almost like a cop out because it's a way to stay like physically pure. But it ends up being that emotionally they get really messed up and wrecked because they've been dating someone for so long that they haven't actually seen. And then it ends up not working out because, like you said, a distraction comes or something happens, they meet another person, and then it's easy to say like, peace out, I'm done with you because I don't even see you anyways. You have to have an end goal. You have to have a reason for why you're long distance. And for us, the reason why we were able to go a year and a half was because we had an end goal. We needed to reach a point in our careers, and we worked really, really hard to get there and saving up the money. And I mean, I was being a girl with lots of dreams. I really wanted a dreamy wedding, and that was super important to me. So that's also part of the reason why we waited a long time, because I wanted this particular venue. I wanted the dress and the photographer, and you know, we needed money for that. So we had to save up for it. But during that time, I was able to come and visit you. You came and visited me. And we were able to make it through that. But I definitely would not recommend that to most people. To be honest, I would actually, if someone said there's this person that I really like and they're long distance, and I would ask why are you long distance? And maybe don't do that.
And I think that's fair. I recently just wedded a couple that were long distance. They met at HungryGen, and then one lived in Arizona and one lived in Colorado, and they were doing long distance. And I know they were talking to me about the challenges, because another thing that happens is that your parents don't get to know the person. And especially if you're younger, your parents have more influence. Let's say that you're before your 30s and your parents are alive. After 30, the parents kind of less and less have a voice, because you're already, fully grown up or whatever, but you're in your early 20s and you're in a long distance. Like, your parents might meet your future spouse once before the wedding. And that is also not, it's okay, if you guys are really set and you're mature and everything, but it can cause troubles, because the parents are like, oh yeah, I don't know this person. I can't bless this wedding. I don't know you guys. I don't know him, or I don't know her. Like, everything I've seen on her is fine, but I don't know her yet. And so that's another red flag, or, another reason why one should really be wary in the long distance.
You have to really make sure you involve your family. And I think for us, you came and visited me, I think 3 times, and for long periods at a time, like 3 weeks at a time, every time you visited. And so my family got to know you. I came and was fortunate to be in Sweden for 3 months and got to spend time with your family. And so we got to know each other, and blend into each other's families. And that's what helped us to also know, like, this is right. Like, this is what, like, we have found so much compatibility on so many levels. And, you know, of course, most importantly, we had the same goals and dreams with ministry and life, and we wanted the same things. So yeah, that's our story when it comes to long distance relationships. I can tell you this, in my life, I never thought that I would ever be in a long distance relationship. And so I feel like I think that was better because I never thought I would do that.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any preconceived notions of what it would be like.
Yeah.
And so I was able to just do it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, to be fair, like, I know God, his hand was on that, because I think that long distance relationship really set us up for the biggest challenge that we faced in our marriage.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. If you have followed our ministry or followed us personally, you know that 1 year into our marriage, so long story short, we got married. I moved over here to America. We were thinking, should she move to Sweden? Should I move to America? I ended up moving here because I speak English. She doesn't speak Swedish. She speaks a little bit, but like,
now.
But back then it would have been so much more difficult for you to kind of get settled
Acclimate,
in. Acclimate. But for me, it was a little bit easier. And so, and we started our process here, paperwork and everything. 1 year into our marriage, I went to Canada. I got stopped at the border and they told me that I have to go back to my country and finish the green card process. That took almost 3 years. COVID hit. And I think if we had never been long distance, we wouldn't have been able to survive that. Honestly, it was too early in our marriage for such a disaster to hit.
Yeah.
It was only God that kept us through that.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that more throughout these podcasts as well. But I wanted to touch on one more thing before we jump into that. And you mentioned that for us, something that worked in our advance was that we were pretty mature in age. Mm-hmm. And so we live in a multicultural church. We go to a multicultural church and there's many different cultures, and it's a very cultural thing. The age when you should get married, right? Certain culture says the sooner the better. Once you're 18, get married. What's the next thing? Come on, where's your man? Where's your woman? Start your family, move out. Other cultures are like, hey, you should take more time. Don't rush it. The world certainly says have fun first. Don't worry to get married, and certainly don't hurry to get pregnant, because, you know, that's a bondage in the world's view. You know, you're stuck after that. That's not at all how we as Christians view it, but nonetheless, you said that we were a little bit more mature. You were 27 when we started dating.
Yes.
When we got married, you were 29 and I was 28.
Yeah, I was literally almost about to turn 29.
Yeah, and I was 30 already. And so for me, it was a very good age. So let's just touch on that for a moment, because there's a lot of people that ask when you're ready to get married. And I have quite an anti-cultural view on this. Many people are shocked when I say it. And I think that you shouldn't even, this is my personal view, okay? It's not in the Bible. This is my personal view. I don't think that you're ready mentally to get married before the age of 25. Now, many people get married before the age of 25 and they have a good marriage. Mm-hmm. But honestly, majority that marries really young might not have as peaceful of a marriage as someone who marries after they're 25. Why? It's because the prefrontal cortex in your brain, the part of your brain that actually stands for abstract thinking
and logical reasoning,
isn't fully developed until the age of 25. And so basically the decisions that you need to make is based on logical reason and abstract thinking when you choose a life partner. And so that exact part of your brain isn't developed until the age of 25. So people ask me, when should I get married? I say, how old are you? 23. Just wait 2 years. It's okay. No rush. But a lot of culture says like, oh, if you're not married by the age of 23, you're a failure. I think especially on women. I think the pressure is more on women in general. I feel like men in any culture don't have as big of a pressure. Now, I have people who got married super early and they don't agree with my view. And they're like, oh, we had a perfect marriage. I get it. It happens. But a lot of the time, it's like a choice. If you marry early, you're gonna expose your wife or your husband to a lot of headaches as you grow and mature as a person. While if you get married a little bit later, you save a lot of headaches from them because hopefully you have matured in certain areas. Now, of course, even people that marry old, there are exceptions to the norm. But so my view is like 25 and upward, you're good to go most of the time. Of course, it's case by case.
Right.
But before then, normally just take time, seek the face of God. And especially if you don't have someone in mind, then don't like you're not talking to anyone, you're not dating anyone, then don't worry about it.
Right.
I'm a strong believer of scripture where it says, seek first the kingdom of God and all other things shall be added onto you. I believe that a husband and a wife is included in all other things.
Yeah.
And so spend those years up until you're 25 to kind of do that. And I know that this is not a super popular opinion to everyone, but that's my view. So I'm curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because when I gave the example of two people that were going off to university and they were going to be long distance relationship for 4 years, I would never recommend that. That's such a long time. So many things can happen. So many temptations can take place. And I just don't think that one should put themselves through that. But like I said, if you have good accountability, you have made a decision together, you both agree on this and you're both faithful to that decision, like it can work out, right? But in general, I would not recommend that. And so if you're going off to school and you're kind of like sort of dating someone, I would say like keep yourself free, I should say. Like if it's meant to be, you will come back together. I do believe that.
Yeah.
And if you're going to school for 4 years after you get out of high school, you're still 22 when you graduate. Like you're still super young. And one thing, I have an aunt who told me this, and it stuck with me for so long. I was 17 and I had my first boyfriend, and things really did not work out between us. And thankfully nothing happened, but it was like an emotional scar for me at that time. And one thing that she told me, she said, Brittany, the person you are today at 17, 18 is not going to be the person you are at 22. You're going to be a completely different person. You're going to think differently. You're going to act differently. And so don't worry about making a lifelong decision at 18 when in 4 years you're going to be different. And it's so true. I was a different person at the age of 22 because I thought more clearly. I had more experiences in my life. And the person who I was at 25 was different from who I was at 22. And at 25, I got a lot of courage and I decided to go live in Nigeria. Like those are things that like as you mature and as you allow God to lead you in your personal life, He will bring the right person. And it's not only about finding the right person, it's about being in the right time and in the right season.
I love that.
And when you're in the right time and the right season, God will bring the right person. And so I was always worried, how am I going to meet the person I'm supposed to marry? I wanted to marry young, but that was not my story. That wasn't what was working out for me. And it wasn't until like I completely let go of the idea of marriage when I was 25 and I said, God, I am going to use these next years of my life, however long it may be, and I'm going to wait for you and I'm going to let you do and say only God can do that. And I think that all of those experiences leading up to us even dating and getting married, that was right for us. I'm not saying that that's right for everyone. I know plenty of people who got married at 19 and 20 and 21 who are enjoying an absolutely beautiful marriage right now. But to piggyback on what you said, they had to grow up together. We grew up on our own and we were able to come together as like mature adults and we had already gone through our own deliverance process. Like as spouses, like I didn't have to wait for you to like get free of bondage that you had been living in. I wasn't suffering on my end because you were in some, bondage or whatever. Like you had taken the time on your own to get free, seek the Lord, and really get on the path of your personal calling from God. And likewise, I did the same.
Yeah.
Like I really recognized in that moment when I was 25, I'm like, I need to make sure that I'm actually where I need to be. And I let God completely just clean me out, deliver me, heal me, set me free, so that when we actually came together, we were two whole people coming together. And for me, that was what I needed. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
And some people grow together and they experience that together, but we did that apart. And I think that was right for us.
Yeah. And I think also like there isn't one that is better than the other. I think it's just both are different. Both have different pros and different cons. Like now I'm 36. We just had our first baby. We're going to be a little bit older parents, which for some people is like, oh man, I want to enjoy those years, let the kids quickly grow up and then enjoy. So there's pros and cons to both of them, but one is definitely not better in all ways than the other. But I think a lot of culture pushes on us like, oh, you're Christian, hey, don't fall into fornication. And also you need to get married and get settled down. You need to have a woman. You need to know what to do at the age of 22, and so whereas there's this whole other aspect that is just as good in a different way. And so it's very important to understand that. Another thing that you said, I really love how you emphasize deliverance. I think, we are both in deliverance ministry, and chances are that you're watching this because you have, experienced deliverance through this or been influenced in some way through this channel and so on. But getting delivered by yourself is so important. So people ask me like, oh, are we ready to get married? And I'm like, are you delivered? I don't know. If you don't know if you're delivered, just count it as no, you're not. Because like if you don't know, that means that you haven't had a powerful deliverance experience yet. Not everyone's deliverance experience is super powerful. We're not going to go into deep detail. We have a lot of videos on that already. But seek deliverance before getting married is one of the staples. Number one, don't marry someone who doesn't have the same faith with you.
Right.
It's just going to be such a headache. It's like you're marrying super young. You will have such headaches that because the person doesn't share the things that you're going through. And so like you can't be equally yoked, as the Bible says. Secondly, don't marry someone who isn't delivered yet.
Yeah.
And so I believe in all those kind of things.
And as much as it is in your power to do so, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like if you don't know about deliverance, if you're like watching this and you're like, I didn't know if my spouse needed deliverance. I didn't even know about deliverance until after we got married, right? Like it's in as much as it's in your power and ability to do that, right? Like, and I think that experience that we had leading up to getting married was very important for us in the type of ministry that we are in.
Yeah.
And I believe that God allowed us to be set apart for so long before we got married, because that's what was necessary for us in our own personal walk with Christ, but also in preparation for being married.
Yeah.
And I think also too in preparation for the trial that we were going to go through, because we obviously went through a really, really traumatic, life-changing experience. And we were in a place in our life that we were mature enough to be able to weather that storm. Yeah. And it was hard. Like, I'm not going to play that down. Like, we had really challenging moments, and maybe in a different episode, we can really go deep and talk about what that was for us. But we now being on the other end of it and we're seeing the faithfulness of God, we are so happy with the decisions that we made along the way, because I think both of us, from an individual point of view, we had already decided in our hearts and minds that we are going to be led by the Spirit of God. Yeah. And that's what ultimately brought us together. And we have learned to wait on God too. And even like you mentioned, us having a child, later in life. I was 33 when I gave birth. And that was scary for me because I always thought that I was going to be a younger mom. And here I am, an older mom, but I am grateful for that, because where we are today, we're able to offer our daughter a life that at the age of 23, we wouldn't have been able to.
Exactly.
You know, we're a lot more stable. We're a lot more grounded. We're on our feet. And we're also not living in different countries in our marriage anymore, you know? So.
And I also think that those ideas that we have of how our life is going to look like in the future many times is influenced by our surroundings. Like you, for example, your sister was probably your best friend throughout your childhood, and she still is. I can testify to that. And your sister had kids way earlier than you, like way earlier. Like her son is 14 now, right? And ours is 1, and you guys are just 1 year apart. So she started basically 13 years before you. And so that definitely becomes like an influence. And I think it's important for everyone to understand, if you're watching this, that your life isn't your family. Your life isn't your friends. Your life isn't your brother or your sister. Maybe if there's someone in your family who, you know, seems to have their stuff together earlier on in life, that doesn't mean that you need to be like them and do it like them, because salvation is personal, right? And just like salvation is personal, your journey also with Christ in terms of marriage, career, and all these things are personal.
Yeah.
So it's not going to look. So if you would have pursued to have a similar life to your sister, inevitably you wouldn't have met me.
Right.
You would have tried hard with someone and got kids early and stuff. And so because you didn't allow that to consume you, even though family and friends will always be an influence, whether big or small, but to not allow that to dictate your plans for your life. I think that is really, really important to understand that. Yeah, my parents got married really young. Well, that doesn't mean that you have to get married really young too. Your life is unique and your life is different. And you also touched on one more thing that I think is really good, and that is the fact that there is the right person, but then there's also the right time. And that means basically that I believe that the right person can wait. If you marry the right person at the wrong time, it's equal to the wrong person. I believe so. I believe that, hey, if we would have married really young, you would have seen a version of me that would have probably disgusted you.
Well, and it wouldn't have been certain that you would have been the man that you are today.
Exactly.
You had experiences on an individual and single level that was very critical to who you are today.
Yeah.
And so had we met sooner, you know, that may not have happened. Like we always talk, I'm like, man, I know we would have been such good friends in high school. Like I just know it based on our personalities. And I wish I knew you longer. But then again, it's like, if I would have known you longer, if we would have known each other.
I can tell you right now, babe, if you knew me back then, you wouldn't have liked me.
But like, I'm also judging based on like how I was as a teenager too. So I'm thinking about the old Brittany as well. So we did have some similarities in our lives and whatnot. And so as much as like, I wish that we could have known each other longer, I think that for us, it was about the time. Like we needed to go on our own individual journeys because of what God wanted to use us for in ministry. Yeah. We couldn't have done that together. I don't think so. Like, because we're both very stubborn. We're both very headstrong, and we have like very, very strong opinions about things. And I think that's what makes us also really great in the respective ministry that we are in. But if we would have done that together, I think one of us would have been weaker in that. But we learned what we learned on our own. And so the fact that our ideals and our vision about things aligned, it was spectacular. And I think that's what made us even more compatible, is that we came to the same conclusions without each other, you know? And I believe that was God's design. And I know we have touched on a lot of subjects today. Like, who would have thought that this would have been our first episode? And we literally touched on everything. But I want to emphasize something that you talked about when you're looking at your life, your dating relationships, coming up into, you know, a marriage relationship, and you look how other people are doing it. Comparison is a thief of joy. Yeah. And no matter how you think your life should be based on what you see around you, what other people are doing, the more you compare yourself and the more you allow yourself to to look at someone else's situation, that's going to rob you of the joy of the Lord.
Yeah.
And when you are walking in your purpose, even if you're single, even if you're not dating, you're not in a relationship, but if you are walking in your purpose, you will have so much joy. Yes, you may feel that void of like, if you have the desire to marry, some people don't, but if you do have the desire to marry, you will feel that void. It's normal, and you shouldn't be sad or depressed by it. Like, when it's the right time, God will bring the right person.
Yeah.
And you're quite frankly, I just don't think you're going to have to work that hard, because by the time it was the right time for us, I feel like I didn't have to do anything. It was like this relationship fell into my lap almost. And it was the most effortless relationship that I had ever been in. I didn't have to try. And I believe that's how it should be, that you shouldn't have to work so hard to make something work.
Yeah. It's almost as if it was added unto you, like the Bible says, right? Because you thought the kingdom of God first. And so it was added unto you. And so I think it's really important also to understand this aspect as we're probably getting close to rounding up this episode here, this first episode, is the fact that inevitably your experiences in life shapes your identity.
Yeah.
I believe so. I believe that I am today a product of a lot of the experiences that I've had. Some things are passed on, but I would say probably the majority of majority of my identity, maybe a majority of the percentage of who I am is as a result of my experiences. And so that is why me getting married younger is basically a different identity altogether, because the experiences that have shaped me, I hadn't had them yet.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that marrying at the right time is almost, or at least equally important to marrying the right person, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with you.
This is another hot podcast take here, okay?
Hot take.
Okay? But like the time that you marry is just as important as the person that you marry. So don't be in a rush. If you think they're the right person, they will come back, or you will meet them, or like if they're the right person and you wait, let's say you wait for a year or 6 months, you met someone at church.
For good reason.
For good reasons, not just for the sake of waiting. If they're the right person, a year isn't going to make them the wrong person. Okay? A year isn't going to make them not being the right person. So if they're the right person, they will stay around. And so so I think that's a very important thing. And another thing why people today are very eager to get married young is because the older you get, now this is a concept that have intrigued me, having a new kid and everything. I know that this is not, it maybe is not even a big thing, but when you're 20 years, 2 years is 10% of your life. But when I'm 40, 2 years is 1% of my life instead. If you're 10,
5%.
Anyway, what I'm trying to say, is the younger you are, the heavier time is.
Yeah.
In the sense that like someone who's 18 and they have to wait a year for something, that's massive for an 18-year-old. Because they only have so many years to compare to. But for me now, the years are starting to run faster and faster and faster the older I get, because it's like, oh yeah, that's just 1% of my life. Or now it's just 0.75%, or like,
right.
You know, like it goes, so that if you wait a little bit longer, time also becomes an easier thing to...
You measure time differently.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think... that's part of the maturity as well. Like we had to wait for 3 years being apart, which was terribly long.
Right.
But if we were 18, it would have been unbearable.
It would have broken us.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be together.
Yeah.
I don't think. Like that would have torn us apart. But we had already, dated long distance for a year and a half. We had that experience under our belt. Plus, I was almost 30, or I was 29, you were 30. By the time we got married, it was like, we had 30 years before we ever even entered into marriage. So that 3 years, while it was really tough, especially because we didn't know the end date, we didn't know that it was going to be 3 years. I think 3 years goes by faster when you know it's going to be 3 years and you can plan for that and you would make different decisions. But we had no idea how long it was going to be. So it felt extra long and extra painful because we didn't know how to plan. We will probably do an episode on that for folks that have some similar situations. It feels pretty rare, but I think there's probably a lot more people who could relate with that.
Yeah, and I think people can relate with, in general, when your marriage go through a traumatic event. It could be work, having to make one of the spouses travel way more. That can actually turn into PTSD for the other spouse or even both of them many times. Trauma isn't just one major event. There is the trauma that is many small events as well. You know, I don't remember the different words. I know one is acute trauma, one has another name, but like basically death by 1,000 cuts kind of a thing. And so many marriages suffer those kind of trauma as well. And so if your marriage has gone through any kind of traumatic experiences and trauma, I think a future episode in that will be very beneficial. But yeah, there we have it. I think is that a good place to round up our first episode?
Yeah, I think a little bit more about us and our story, how we met.
Yeah.
And we kind of dabbled a little bit into the challenges that we have faced in preparation for future episodes.
Yeah.
But even based on our story, we still feel like we're not even qualified to give marriage advice. We can share our experiences, and that's what I think we're really good at. But we want to open up space for other people who have many more years than we do, who have experienced different kinds of challenges and successes and highlights in their marriage. And so that's what we hope that this podcast will be. But now that you know a little bit more about us, hopefully you'll come along for the ride.
Yeah. And sometimes we'll host discussion boards and, where I have an idea of having different generations, Gen Z and boomers and all kinds of generations come together and talk about the do's and don'ts of marriage and how that has changed throughout generations. And some of the things, we say, hey, listen to the old, they're wise. Many times they are. But there are certain things that young people also figure out nowadays and how it works. The old people are like, oh, it doesn't work. Man just works hard and woman just cleans the house. And, it doesn't work exactly the same in every marriage any longer because of the culture that we live in and so on. So we'll have a lot of fun stuff in the future. I hope you enjoyed watching this, guys. Thank you so much for staying with us. From me and Brittany here at One Flesh Podcast, we love you. This podcast will be coming out once a month, and this is the first episode. Keep an eye out. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you hit the bell button so that you get a notification when new episodes come out. We love you. Jesus loves you more, and we'll see you soon again, okay?
We'll see you next time.